I've started recording, so anything you say from here on out, I can use against you.
Okay, that goes the same for you then. So we just
No,
caught your
no.
yeah.
I'm the editor. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Jesse's Room. It's a podcast about movies and stuff, and today we're talking about two of them. Movies, that is. I'm Ben.
Hello, I am Rora, and I concur with the statement about talking about movies.
What are the two movies?
Uh, Going from release date order, the first one is the always popular There Will Be Blood, which was released in 2007, and the second one is the 2020 release, The Devil All the Time.
Those are the two movies, yes.
But yeah, so I guess I can explain why these two, if you want, since
Sure.
okay, so basically, the reason why I like put the idea out for these two is because not only from like an aesthetics wise, like, obviously, they're not the same time period, but they're both like more not vintage, but they're both like older settings with, There Will Be Blood in the early 20th century and The Devil All the Time I believe is like it either takes place like very early 2000s or like late like 1900s. I don't exactly remember, but just the aesthetics of it and like sort of like the rural areas and like all of the themes of like greed, power, and like religion that are evident in both of them. And I just thought that it was a cool like um pairing.
But just to clarify, when you said Devil All the Time does not take place in the 2000s. I don't know if you meant to say that. Or
I actually don't remember. When does it take place?
it was like
It
the
takes place in like the
50s.
50s and 60s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I wasn't 100%. Okay.
Yeah, you kind of jumped there, but yeah.
Yeah. Either way, both of them do not take place in a modern setting, which was my point, regardless of the inaccuracies in timing. Yeah, you want to introduce There Will Be Blood, and then I'll do the other one.
Sure. Sure, I'll do that.
All right, cool.
There Will Be Blood is a film from Paul Thomas Anderson, 2007, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Paul Dano, various others along the way. Um, did not win Best Picture, but was nominated and won several awards at the 2007 Academy Awards. 2007 was a really great year because it was beaten out by No Country for Old Men for Best Picture, which kind of shows like how far we've come. So I think I always like point to 2007 as like peak sort of like awards, and just is a great year for film in general. We also had Ratatouille, Zodiac, Hot Fuzz, Superbad. What else? Death Proof, New Tarantino, always great. Spider-Man 3. um, but yeah, it's definitely a sort of different time period for just filmmaking in general, which I think is important to set up for talking about Paul Thomas Anderson and his career. He's definitely one of my favorite directors. I think in terms of like consistency, his filmography is probably like some of the like most concise work out of any filmmaker. Like he's only like I don't think he's made a single film that I have disliked, and I've seen all of them. But Hard Eight was his first feature, and then from there it's just sort of like skyrocketing up. And There Will Be Blood was sort of like his, I want to say like mainstream sort of peak. And so that sort of is where I'm coming from looking at this film as sort of his like definitive like masterpiece type of thing. Even though I like The Master better as a film and just sort of in my like personal sort of top 50, I think it's even up there. But I think There Will Be Blood is probably also like in terms of like the filmmaking aspect, probably one of the best films of his and as well as of the 2000s.
Nice. I'm just trying to think on how to respond to that because that was really well done. um, I mean, honestly, I thought that this was like just general opinions first before we get into anything really too deep. Um, the main thing that I enjoy about films like this, because especially when the plot is like very like not basic, but more like it's about like oil, you know? Like generally look for interesting characters to sort of like move it forward, and I think that the best part about this was in fact the characters, in my opinion. I thought they were all really believable and well written and well acted. And that was like the main takeaway I had from this movie was just like how emotionally like impactful a lot of the things that he wrote this, right? I think, or did he just direct it? I don't
Yeah,
really
he writes
remember.
all of them.
He wrote it? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. But he wrote them to, like be very like every time they do something, you're like, oh, why? Like that's sort of like why did that happen? And that was like the thing that I thought was really well done about this, especially for being such like a sort of like, oh, it's a history topic, it's about oil, like it was definitely more than that because of how he wrote the characters and just like a general opinion of it. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a character study more so than a period piece. Kind of like he definitely sort of reiterated a lot of the things he did in this with Phantom Thread, but sort of that one's even more focused on the characters rather than like is well, I guess you haven't seen it, but it's sort of like another Daniel Day-Lewis thing. Kind of, there are a lot of similarities, but it's definitely more slower, like more, I guess you would say meditative. But this film, I think for sure, puts an emphasis on, well, specifically the character that Daniel Day-Lewis plays, which I'm looking, he did win Best Actor for the role at the Oscars. It was nominated for, I have it pulled up, so I'm looking. It was nominated for 8 Oscars, but it only won for Daniel Day-Lewis and cinematography, which I thought it won more than that. I thought PTA won Best Director, but I was wrong. So, oh, it went to the Coens for No Country. That makes sense. Anyway, the film itself, we can kind of get in more depth now. Well, it's about an oil man and sort of his conquest of the industry and sort of corruption of this small town, which is located on top of an oil field. And that's sort of like the bulk of it. Will you go? I mean, it stretches throughout a large span of time, the plot of the events of the film, but that's the main sort of thing. And the essentially antagonist, if you want to view that, or if you want to view the plot in those terms, would be Eli Sunday, who's played by Paul Dano, and he's the sort of local preacher. And so it's essentially um, kind of like a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson films. It's these two incredibly conflicting characters who sort of like have essentially opposite goals, but both are after power nonetheless. It's essentially is a film about power and control, and a lot of sort of commentary on capitalism and how it's sort of the dawn of this sort of new type of era, basically, in this like industry driven like greed, basically, which is sort of what the title is in reference to. Like it's one of those films that is like it holds your attention through the action and through like there's lots of yelling and lots of like super dramatic theatrical moments, like high energy stuff. Uh but in addition to that, there's a lot sort of beneath the surface, a lot thematically going on. So it's definitely it feels like a film from a different era than now. It's like a huge like grand scale film that's like fully like could bring in like a theater full of general audience members, all while being like so well made and so basically like from a filmmaker's vision. Like it's sort of distinct, not distinct in that, but for me it sort of represents that. A lot of the sort of early PTA stuff, like this is like like I kind of do view it as the end of an era a bit in terms of the like film like as a whole. This is sort of not related to the film specifically, but just like it sort of represents a lot of like changing times just looking at this now from sort of 2021 perspective. Um and so I feel like even a lot of the themes of the film are sort of reiterated through real life, and it kind of makes it even more powerful than it already was.
Yeah, I think that I agree with what you're saying. I think it's like with all the themes present and everything and how it was like sort of you're right, there's not really you don't really see much of this type of cinema in like present day. It's more sort of like this side the one another thing I liked about this to but another thing I liked about this is this subtlety that like it was like filmed and like written with like especially the cinematography in it was fantastic and really fueled that. But I thought all the components of this like so subtly went together and was like so well crafted. And I noticed a lot more in like more modern films like in the last couple years everything's a lot more like in your face, like even if like there was like a twist or something, like there was always like references hidden throughout it to sort of like lead you to this point. But this one was so like this film was almost so direct that any like traces of something hidden in it were so subtle that you didn't even notice it until it was necessary. um which I really also liked how he did that with this film. It was really great.
Yeah, I feel like it almost goes without saying that, Paul Thomas Anderson, especially with this, like, again, just like the kind of budget that goes into this type of thing, like, huge, like, scale period piece given to um, a legitimate filmmaker. Like, the cinematography, the blocking of the scenes, especially, he puts a lot of emphasis on that for sure throughout his career. Um, Also, the score was really good, sort of unique. It's not there. It doesn't have much of a presence, but when it does, it's definitely like very fitting. Um, but yeah, all of the costumes and effects look great in terms of making like it feel like this sort of very down, like sort of downwardly like spiraling, dark, messed up story, basically of this. You know, I mean, the title alone sort of gives away everything you need to know. And I think the tagline is something like "You will have vengeance" or something. Oh, there will be
It says
greed.
there will
There
be
will
greed,
be
there will be vengeance. Yeah.
yeah. It's just like it all goes together in a really great way. And what you were saying about the subtlety, that's definitely true. But I think a big aspect of it is like the subtlety builds to a point where it's like even though you're not like consciously noticing it, like your brain is still processing it basically. And so like with repeat viewings, you can kind of like understand more and more. Like you get it's a different experience on every rewatch, and you just sort of it deepens your appreciation of it every time you watch it.
Yeah, no, that's what I guess I didn't say it correctly, but that's what I was trying to say about the subtlety thing. Um but yeah, honestly like the amount of like when I was watching this, like the main thing like at first like call me an idiot, but like when I was watching this right up until he put the son on the train, I was like, "Oh, this guy's like not the worst guy in the world." I'm like, "He's not that bad." And like I didn't notice the signs of who he actually was. I sort of was like, oh, he's kind of like, the whole thing with him ignoring Eli in like the opening ceremony. I was like, all right, that wasn't the nicest thing to do, but Eli also is like a little bit like in your face, so I get it. I was kind of like mentally defending him. And then from the second he like got off the train and the kid was like trying to go after him, I was like, oh, I was like, no, no, no. I was like, I read this and this whole thing wrong. Um, which not to like sound prideful or anything, but usually that doesn't like I don't usually have that bad of a read on characters. And so I was genuinely surprised by that. And I thought it was really like it really just sort of aided to this story and like aided to like the fact that like you normally like even in like capitalism and all this stuff that it's like commenting on, you don't it's not in your face, you know, like you have to like actually look for it. And I thought that that was very very well done, especially for Daniel's character, because I went from like liking him as a character to being like this guy is awful. You know what I mean? Like so it was like and it was a snap thing too. So I thought that that was really really not cool but really well done, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, I can't really remember the first time I watched this, but I think that might I don't think I had that same experience. I'm pretty sure I just you really don't like him from the beginning because you see he like steals the guy's baby for well I guess that's
Yeah.
spoilers. Well,
Well, the
no,
guy
that's the
died
opening. That's
too.
the opening of the film, so I guess not
Yeah,
really.
but the guy
But
died though, and then he took the kid after the guy died. So he wasn't really stealing it. He was more
well, yeah,
like
but he was clearly like using it for his own benefit.
I wanted to talk about some of the like some scenes in particular. So did you have anything you wanted to like bring up before we get into like the actual content of the movie or
No, you can go ahead,
all right.
take the lead with that.
Um okay. Well, I mean first and foremost, my favorite scene like aesthetically and I guess like plot-wise was the scene spoiler kind of slight spoiler when his son HW like is in the accident and like the oil tower explodes and he goes deaf. um I thought visually it was such a stunning shot, or like sequence of shots rather, like with the fire and them covered in oil and you know the kid like lying down. I and like all of it was like I really liked that scene. It was my favorite one. You know, and it was kinda like from that point on, like, yeah, a couple people had, like, gotten killed in the process, but that was, like, sort of like for me anyway, it felt like the beginning towards, like, a much darker turn because his son, who was just, like I forget what he was doing, but he was kinda just, like, hanging out. He wasn't even, like, directly doing anything, but he was, like, the most one of the most injured ones that day from the explosion. It just sort of like took a turn for the worse after that. You know, with him beating up Eli and blaming him for it and all this stuff. So I just to me that scene was like both important plot wise and also just visually very stunning. Um
Yeah, I think there's a lot in there about like that. Well, I guess I should like, have you? How many times have you seen this movie?
just
Is it
one,
just
but I watched it like in the last 2 weeks. So it's still like pretty fresh.
no? I was just like it definitely like just on repeat viewings. You'll definitely because I've seen this like 3 or 4 times, I think. So it's just like on repeat viewings, especially, you sort of pick up more and more about the sort of dynamic between the Daniel, what is Daniel
His name's
Plainview,
Daniel Plainview, yeah.
and HW, right? Is the kid's name? Um, and how it's sort of, I mean, from the beginning, we see his like opening pitch trying to like sell them like why he's the best oil guy, and like he uses basically his son as like a as to paint him as like the what am I thinking, family man like image. Well, yeah, and just sort of using him entirely. And so like you kind of like after watching it once or twice, you kind of get more and more how like he's upset that HW gets injured in that sort of accident, but really he only is that upset because he just basically lost an asset essentially for his
Yeah.
business. It's going to affect his like marketability. And so it definitely like there's so much subtlety in the dialogue from the beginning. And like there is some like father son bonding in quotes. Like he takes them out to like when they're pretending to just be hunters or whatever at the beginning, but they're really scouting for oil. He's kind of like teaching him. Their only connection is coming through like him sort of training him to like become just like him and sort of basically indoctrinate him into this sort of like exact same practices that he's already doing so that he can essentially become like an extension of who he already is, which again would affect profit margins essentially. and just the whole idea of that accident sort of coming as a blow to him, not on an emotional level, but on like a practical level. And so I think that's definitely like a turning point in the story. But no, yeah, I think that's definitely an important like plot point to point out in the like overall like thematic parts of the story.
Yeah, and, like, to add on to what you said about, like, how he was, like, training him to be like him, I just like, when you said that, like, at the end, the conversation that they have, like, when he's, like, older, like, directly juxtaposes that, concept, when when he's, like, saying, "I wanna start my own oil business," and, Daniel is pretty much like, "So you're gonna be a direct competitor now? I thought we were working together," and, like, it just which is just goes to show really, like, how, like, bad, I guess, Daniel is sort of going back on his word and, like, what he does,
But
quite frequently.
from that, because that he essentially spent um so much time with Daniel, he's still, even though he is like parting ways with him, he's still sticking in that oil business. He's still
Yeah.
basically doing the same things that he was taught to do. He's just doing it in a different context. So I still think it's like he didn't really break free. Like he's still essentially he's repeating the whole cycle. I mean, sure, maybe he's gonna be a better person, better sort of ethics or whatever, but that's besides the point. Like he still was like basically trapped. And even though he got away from Daniel the person, he still, regardless, he was still raised by that person. And so he's kind of like repeating, not really repeating a cycle, but he still is like in that regardless.
What I think that's the whole point, like, to, like, comment on, like, the fact that that's what happens, you know what I mean? That, like, despite what you try to do, once you're in that sort of world, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get back out, you know? And I think that, like, you're right, he could potentially be a better person, he could, like, not be as ruthless or, as manipulative or whatever, but at the end of the day, he's still part of it. And, the ironic part is that Daniel doesn't really see, at least in my view, he doesn't see it that way. It's more like this was you did this to me instead of like you did this for like himself or whatever, you know what I mean? Uh which, comments on the fact that like he's not repeating it like you said, he's more continuing this cycle um of like, the business world, which is also another like um part of the sort of thematic value that I liked in it.
Yeah, well, I guess we should also sort of talk about it isn't about the dynamic. We've kind of spent a lot of time on it, but the film is not about the dynamic between Daniel and his son. It's definitely
Oh yeah,
the
no,
son
it's not.
leaves. The son is absent for a good chunk of the film, and even when he is there, he's definitely like a side character. And it like I said, it's about, I mean, it's about power and essentially between Paul Dano, Eli Sunday, and Daniel, and sort of just like the whole idea of power coming through money versus power coming through control, because it's not really like about religion for um Eli's like church stuff. Yeah, he is not just like he's preaching like just Christianity. It's not like just a Sunday service or whatever. He's like, casting out demons through like his like acting as like a vessel. He's like, I'm curing your arthritis, because it's still from that like era of like heavily sort of religious small town. And Eli has sort of like, because he's the local preacher in the small town, he has been able to have power through that. And so coming in through this, that's why I think it is like kind of about changing eras as well as the film acting as one in itself. Sort of Daniel coming in and obviously changing the power dynamic by presenting a challenge to Eli, but also just like in general power throughout the world just sort of changing in this like shift to like corruption through money and all of that stuff being brought in through this like not really innocent town but this still smaller traditional town. And so I think it's sort of rather than like good preacher man being cast out by evil oil guy, it's like sort of the modern age trampling over this traditional ways, which the traditional ways weren't very good either, but it's about that sort of dynamic between the two and sort of in general, in like sort of boiled down to power in general being like the corrupting factor rather than like just money or just anything. It's sort of still about that greed and about that like money as well, because money is still involved in the preacher's like goals as well. It's not just that he wants to keep in power, he's also trying to expand his church, expand like into, we see in the ending with like he got into radio stuff like that. So I think it's definitely very nuanced like dynamic between the two. And like I said, it's I think it's Paul Thomas Anderson, he has like a quote of saying like contrasting characters make great cinema or something. And so in a lot of his films you kind of have those two like central characters just like completely like clashing at each other for the entire, 2.5 hour runtime.
Yeah, and to add on to that, it's kind of funny because they are very like in their fundamentals, both are obviously very different, but their end goals are actually kind of aligned if you think about it. Because like, obviously Eli didn't want, his town to be taken over, or like rather taken out of his control. But he wanted to expand his power, expand his wealth, and he used that not he used it not wait. He wanted to like expand his power and expand his wealth, and the way he was currently controlling or, like sort of like regulating the town, I guess, was through like his religion. And not saying that he was like manipulating them or anything, but like it's the ideals of like having these people believe you and like follow you are similar to the much worse way in which Daniel was sort of like being like, "Oh, we're gonna open up schools, and they're gonna be families like on the land, like of the oil workers," and like he was like appealing to the masses, in a way that sort of set up this like not utopia, but like essentially a utopia in their town of like everything they could possibly want. And in like a strictly like principle sense, their goals were in fact aligned because, Daniel also wanted the power and the money and he wanted to build up his business and everything. And so while their characteristics and their traits were quite contrary to each other, I think their goals were slightly similar, which really like emphasized the power play here that was like evident. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Eli was manipulating the
Okay, well, I didn't
townspeople
want
to
to
get.
just like outright imply anything, so but yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Well, I mean, he very directly is though. Like he's casting out demons like through his like, just like his hand is like sort of like putting on basically a theatrical display, and like it's very. I think one of the sort of more well-known scenes is where Eli basically forces Daniel to go into his church and sort of go into his domain and sort of like very directly, like, I guess you would say, belittle Daniel in every way that he
Yeah.
possibly can.
You mean the
And
baptism scene, right?
yeah, that's the
Okay.
only scene where he like actually goes into the church. And so it's sort of just like this constant like escalation as well of this conflict between the two. And it definitely builds up to the ending pretty much from the first like interaction between the two characters. I don't. We're probably not going to directly say what the ending is, but I definitely think that's kind of what ties the whole film together for me. I think on like the first watch, it was kind of like it almost like played out as like a like gag because it's like he I guess since we're already in spoilers, he like he he beats him to death with a bowling pin, and then like what does he say after he's done? It's like
Yeah, oh my god, my favorite. He's like, I'm finished.
yeah, and then it cuts to credits, and it's like
Yeah.
almost like a gag, like that's supposed to be a laugh moment. But I think with repeat viewings, you definitely get like this is exactly how it's been building to from the moment that like it first started. Basically, like this is the conflict. This is the greed. This is what it all leads to. And yeah, I mean, from the beginning, we know that there will be blood. Like it's very direct in exactly like what it's trying to say. And I think that the craftsmanship behind it and the sort of emphasis put on the characters and making them interesting on their own kind of hides the fact that this is like a very direct like story. It almost acts as like sort of allegorical in a like on a certain level, but it's just so like sort of layered behind like the sort of entertaining value that like it's a bunch of guys oil stuff things blow up, it's exciting, sort of like the character level, the technical level, and then just sort of the thematic level on its own is like 3 layers deep just in that. And so I think it is like a very like specific type of thing. And that's why I think even though I like the master more, I don't think the master has that like top layer of like just being an entertaining like high energy type of thing. Like the master is just like a bunch of guys in rooms for 2 hours, like it's definitely There Will Be Blood is like sort of the pinnacle of that sort of early to mid 2000s Paul Thomas Anderson. I mean his I keep bringing up his filmography because I just absolutely love him as a filmmaker, going from Hard Eight to Boogie Nights to Magnolia to Punch Drunk Love and then to this. It's like insane that progression. And then from The Master to Inherent Vice is like the biggest jump since then. And then taking some time off and doing the Phantom Thread. And I know I'm just saying nonsense words to you because you haven't seen any of
Okay,
these,
I know the general concepts of all of them, so I get what you're saying.
but yeah, it's insane. Basically, his filmography, I think like he's on par. This might sound strange to some of the viewers, but I think his filmography is on par with Kubrick and like that level in terms of consistency. Because like there's so many like even my favorite directors like Wong Kar-wai, Fellini, Bergman, like there are Bergman movies that I don't want to rewatch. But with there is like something to say with like having a limited filmography, like Tarantino, like he's gonna do 10 and then he's done, or so he says. But like I think there is something to that of just like doing what you're trying to do and then just like not making a bunch of films for the sake of like just making them. And of course a lot of that has to do with the time period. Like Paul Thomas Anderson like worked in a very specific time and place where you could make something like There Will Be Blood and have it be like incredibly successful financially, as well as everything else. Like I want to say how much money it had, a budget of 25 million, box office of 76 million. Like it's just like it's very specific is what I'm trying to say. And when I'm talking about like eras and stuff, I know it kind of seems like, oh, modern day bad, old movie good, but it's like um obviously different time periods make different movies. Like there are tons of 2020 movies which are, great, but they're incredibly different from 2007 movies. Like each era is different, and just because it's different doesn't mean that like it's good or bad. Like obviously you're going to have sort of ties to different eras because it's like distinct and stuff. But I think it's like I do want to clarify because there's a huge amount of people that's just like, oh, what happened to movies? They don't make good movies anymore. And it's just like it's just different from what your standards are. You're being society, not anyone specifically. But yeah, so I do want to clarify, so it doesn't sound like I'm just complaining about why isn't There Would Be Blood wouldn't be made today. Like, yeah, of course, a movie made in 2007 would not be the same movie if it was made in 2021. That's just, I mean, should go without saying, but lots of people definitely have that attitude. So I wanted to clarify.
Going back to the movie, no, no, yeah, I agree with you. But I just actually wanted to go back to the end scene because I wanted to say something about that. Um, I thought that was one of the most realistic parts of the film actually, because it was sort of like he just literally viciously beat this man to death with like a bowling pin, and he just kind of sits there like lounging almost, with his like legs, like his arms, his elbows on his knees, and he kind of just goes, "I'm finished," um which reads as like very psychopathic almost, which, or sociopathic depending, which most like hardcore businessmen show those type of traits, so I thought it was actually one of the most realistic, albeit slightly entertaining parts of the film, but just to
No,
clarify that.
no. To
But
clarify, what I didn't say it played out as I said it like almost seemed like one. I wasn't saying
no, I
like it
know, yeah,
actually was one.
no, I said I didn't read it as a gag is what I said.
No, I was
um
clarifying I didn't either, in case
oh,
it
okay.
did seem like that. I was just saying that like I meant like it's almost a comedic cut from that to like credits
Oh,
with
okay,
music and
yeah,
playing. Like that,
okay,
the timing of it could have been like describing that could sound like a gag. Is what I was saying.
okay,
Like
okay, yeah, yeah.
that's almost how it plays out. But no, I completely agree.
Yeah, but also I wanted to because you were talking about like the dynamic between them like all the way up to the end, and especially with the scene where he like publicly humiliates Daniel. He like, I forget what he makes him say, but like he's like, "You're a bad father, like you abandoned your son," or something like that. And he makes him like repeat it, right? And then I thought that it was an interesting choice to pretty much have Daniel do it right back to him at the end when he's like, "I will give you what you want if you say that you are a false prophet and God is a superstition." He makes him like repeat it and shout it. And then afterwards, he's like, "Yeah, that was done a while ago. You're not getting that." And he kind of sort of like pulls the rug out from under him. Because even down to the end, he's always gonna win. You know what I mean? Like he's not gonna lose, especially not to Eli. And I thought that, when you were talking about like the dynamic between the two of them and how like sort of like that back and forth, I thought that that honestly like perfectly illustrated their relationship and like the way that they reacted to each other. And I thought it was great that that happened like right at the very end. But yeah, that's yeah.
No, yeah. That's definitely like very direct, like repetition, and like I said, it's almost like that's not like subtle, like that he's like making him do what he did to earlier in the film, like he's making him do it again, and that's like I'm writing a review of The Green Knight, and I was sort of thinking similar things where it's like um its metaphors are kind of like it wears its metaphors on its sleeve almost, like it's not really like there are parts of it that are meant to be read surface level, and it's like that's how it's able to get this sort of mainstream audience to like appreciate all of these super like what could have been an art house film basically. um but it's like it's such a his style, PTA's sort of like bringing all of these aspects from sort of like a love of film into this like super like smooth craftsmanship, bringing combining these things, and with a really like always solid script with he's always able to get such amazing performances out of his actors, and combining all of these things into a film um definitely brings it all together with stuff like that ending, and with like the repetition between the characters. He's able to like communicate very effectively, like exactly everything that he's meant to be like understood. Like you understand everything about the film, even though there's so much that you can pick up on with repeat viewings. And so I think that's like, especially with this film, kind of captures a lot of that. But yeah,
But yeah, I actually had a question for you because I myself, while I was watching this, I thought that it was going to take a turn somewhere and it didn't. So Paul, do you remember Paul? Like
yeah,
yeah. So
the brother, yeah.
do you think he was a brother, or do you think it was the same? You think it was Eli just showing up to try and get him to come out? Because I was researching it because I thought that it was going to be the same kid, but it wasn't. So I was researching it, and a lot of people think that the brother was actually just Eli pretending to be someone else because he never shows up for the remainder of the film,
Yeah.
and
And they're
kind of just
both played by the same
the
actor.
same actor.
So
Yeah. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
no, that's interesting. I haven't heard that actually. I always read it as like the surface level of like, because I love the line of towards the ending where it's like it was Paul who was the chosen one. He was
Yeah.
God's. Like I think it plays into that. But I feel like that's like sort of an interesting like theory or like whatever that could be like sort of explored, like that type of like, it doesn't affect the film either
No,
way,
yeah.
but it's the type of thing that's fun to talk about, like with the ending of The Thing. Is Childs a thing, or is it just humans? Or like the just the film theory type stuff. That's
Yeah.
I think that they're two different people, just because it would, yeah, I guess it would work if Eli was Paul, but no, I don't really think that. I don't see why. I mean, that's an interesting thing to bring up, but no, I don't really think that Paul Thomas Anderson would really like put that much depth into it. But
No, I know that he didn't. I was because I the cast list says for like Paul and Eli, and like it just like you said with what Daniel says at the end. But I thought it was going that way, so I was at more asking if you had that thought as well,
no,
because it seemed other people did as well. But
I
yeah, no,
hadn't not heard that. That's interesting though.
mm,
I don't think so, but yeah, I think maybe
yeah,
I'll rewatch it with that idea in mind. It'll give a different experience. But no, that is interesting though. That's like for 12 Angry Men, like, was the guy actually guilty? Here's the definitive proof, and it's like, that's not really the point of the movie, but it's fun to like talk about, you know. So that
yeah,
type of thing does definitely interest me. But there's definitely a lot of people who like become super like focused in that, but like, because of this super small
yeah,
detail, this changes everything about the movie. And like, no, that's not the point.
yeah,
But it just like completely undercutting the whole like thematic and emotional pull of the movie, just because this like one detail is like, you take something and run with it. But no, I
yeah,
never really even thought about that. That's yeah, it would work either way thematically as well.
yeah,
The whole idea of Eli being a false prophet and stuff like that. But I think I like the idea of Paul kind of just being this like random guy acting as the catalyst to like this
yeah,
whole like larger story. And again, I still really like the whole like it was Paul. He like draws out when he says it, and he's
yeah,
and I just love Paul Dano as an actor, like shrieking and stuff. He's
yeah,
such like just a dweeb, and seeing him
yeah,
like cast as this like super powerful figure, basically, like it's laughable, but it's taken so seriously because of how the nature of the town and the nature of his like sort of position there, and against such
yeah.
a like a towering figure like Daniel Day-Lewis, like because I think they're both really great actors, but I doubt anyone will argue when I say Daniel Day-Lewis like commands the screen whenever he's like there. Like he's not acting circles above everyone else, but he's definitely like on a different tier than Paul Dano. And so I think it's just like,
Yeah.
especially it's, I keep bringing it up, but Paul Thomas Anderson, he gets exactly what he wants out of the actors. I mean, I think this is probably the best Daniel Day Lewis performance that I've seen. I really liked Phantom Thread as well. I haven't seen Age of Innocence, which is the Scorsese period piece that he's in, but yeah, I mean he's definitely the both of them just give such great performances. I just love like every time it was just the two of them on screen, it's just such a great dynamic, like even just visually, like even if there wasn't any dialogue, just seeing them interact is always great.
Yeah, I mean, like, going back to the ending scene, that was just so well acted from both of them, and I mean, like, the dialogue itself is just I mean, like, it's, like, so perfect because they're both, like, dead serious, and then, like you said, like, Paul Dano just starts, like, shrieking and, like, crawling backwards on the floor, and it's just, like, a mess, but it's the funniest thing, and also, like, the most, like, slightly terrifying thing. I mean, like, if Daniel Day-Lewis was coming after you with a bowling pin, I think I'd be pretty freaked out too.
Yeah. Well, as well with the Paul Dano shrieking, since we're talking about that. Um like his just like service before he makes Daniel get baptized and stuff. But just like his
Oh,
like
yeah.
commanding of like the demons to get out. Like he's just such like a loser, like to the audience it's like laughable, but he's playing it like so straight basically, and the camera isn't like like sort of visually it's played like as just a serious scene, but it's just like him shouting and like it's just like 10 years later he would just be like a total like reject basically, but because he's in this very specific time in this very specific place, like he could lose that power so quickly, which we see he kind of does towards the end. um it's just such an interesting dynamic and casting choice. He's also great. What was it? Prisoners.
Prisoners?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a
He
great movie.
yeah, another great shrieking Paul Dano film. But yeah. He was also in Little Miss Sunshine, which I haven't seen, but oh, Swiss Army Man. Yeah, he was great in that as well. He that was his like he was have you seen that? Swiss
No,
Army
I have
Man?
not.
Has Paul Dano is the main character, which I think he's usually like side character or supporting actor, but it's him and Daniel Radcliffe just in the woods for 90 minutes. And it's just so great. It's such a feel good movie, lighthearted and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Basically, just really quickly, uh, Paul Dano gets like stranded on an island and he finds a dead body who's Daniel Radcliffe, and like he basically just talks to the dead body, and because it's a movie, Daniel Radcliffe like talks back and they become good friends. That's the whole movie. It's great. But anyway,
That sounds interesting.
the exact same plot as There Will Be Blood. Okay, yeah. So just to sort of wrap things up, great film. Uh the best film, you could say. I think it would be in my I don't know. I haven't actually sat down and looked at it, but it's probably in my like top 10 of the 2000s, I think. But I kind of talked a lot about I know I kind of went off topic a bit, sort of talking about the context of it and Paul Thomas Anderson, but that all very much interests me. And this film, like I said, I feel like it's a sort of end of an era of sorts. Not in a negative way, but like, there's always going to be a sense of nostalgia whenever things change, and change is neither good nor bad. It's just sort of the natural progression of things. So I definitely like this. I hold this film to very high esteem as sort of like the pinnacle of that era, sort of defining the change. So yeah, I give this film a 5 out of 5. Masterpiece. What would you rate this film?
I gave it a 4 out of 5, so an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, that is what I gave to your credit. That is what I gave it the first time I watched it. But yeah, anyway, on to the next film. I have
Alright,
a lot less to say about this one, so I'm gonna let you kind
I
of take the lead.
yeah, I have a good amount to say about this one because I genuinely really love this movie. So anyway, The Devil All the Time was a 2020 release by director Antonio Campos, and basically it tells the story of a young man, Arvin, played by Tom Holland, who grows up like in There Will Be Blood in a very small religious town, and this happens in the first like 30 minutes I say in the movie, but his father and mother are both have both died when he was a young child, and so he grew up in the care of his grandparents, who also adopted another orphan who is his like adoptive stepsister, I guess. Uh, Her name is Lenora, and it basically just kind of is like this small town story about all these different people who live various like different lives, and they're sort of interconnected, and it's a very violent movie. That also displays themes of power, corruption, and specifically corruption through religion a lot as well, more so than There Will Be Blood.
Well,
But
I
what?
think they're comparable.
No, they are,
I
but this one, like, there's no oil in this one. It's literally just like the
no,
preacher is not a good guy.
yeah,
So it's more focused on it than There Will Be Blood. Um,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
on religion in general, yeah.
No, yeah, on the religious aspect specifically. Although they do have very similar scenes, specifically, the Paul Dano scene we were just referring to, something very similar happens. But before we get into it, what were your thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, I don't know when you watched this as well, if this was also a recent watch for you, but
No, I watched
I
this like when it came out.
yeah, I was gonna say the same for me. I sort of 2020, I was actively like watching as many new releases as I could, just because that was sort of like the first year that I was like actively doing so. And so I had heard a lot about this, and I really like Robert Pattinson, and I sort of had heard some things about it, and I thought it looked interesting. Um, and in my 2020 ranked list, which you can view on my Letterboxd, it came in number 23 out of 80. So this was definitely, top 25, which was, I definitely liked this film a lot. Um, it's not perfect. It has a lot of issues as well. One of which I would say is well, I can talk about this. I just sort of put it on one night. It was a Netflix original, which we should mention, but we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. I just sort of was watching it sort of later at night. I was like, it's Tom Holland, this whatever. I paused it and I looked. I was only like halfway through. I thought it was almost over because it's like 2 hours and like almost 2.5 hours. 2 hours 38 minutes. So it's definitely the runtime was surprising, and I still don't really know how I feel about it. I think it had some fat for sure, but like you said, it's very much like a interconnective, like sort of series of things emphasizing a singular theme, which I appreciated a lot of it. And as a Netflix original, I think it was definitely huge steps in the sort of right direction in a lot of ways for this type of movie. So I think I probably appreciated it more than I really liked it.
Well, on going back to the runtime, I actually thought that the runtime was not an issue for me. I actually thought it you're not gonna like me saying this, but I thought the runtime fit this one better than There Will Be Blood. Um, I found myself sort of like like checking the clock when I was watching There Will Be Blood, and this one I was so like entranced by the story. I didn't feel that at all. So for me, the runtime wasn't an issue, but I do agree that there were some scenes that were like not entirely necessary, but I don't think that it was enough to excuse me. I don't think it was enough to like warrant a knock on the runtime.
Well,
But
I meant more if it was surprising. Like I did not expect
no,
this to be
I know.
this Netflix original with Tom Holland to be like it was not at all what I expected it to be as a film either. Like
Yeah,
for
same.
like it was definitely in a good way, I would say. Like it definitely had more of like a thematic
hmm
element to it than I thought it would. I thought it would just sort of be like thriller, Tom Holland on the run type of thing. But shockingly, for me, it was shot on 35 millimeter with like film, which is rare for a Netflix original. Um, and I think it looked pretty great visually. The cinematography wasn't like mind blowing, but I thought the quality of it looked, really good. Which is definitely, I hope, Netflix, something that Netflix should continue to do. Because shooting things on film, obviously, it kind of is more expensive and everything. But I think for this type of movie, it definitely benefits from having that sort of like not classic, but sort of like film look. Like it's a cinematic. It is a very like cinematic story. Like had this come to theaters, I mean, no one would have seen it because it was 2020, but I think it would have. I don't know if it would have done well in theaters, but I think it would have looked good, like up on the big screen, like it would have belonged there. But I think as a Netflix release, it probably got a wider audience because of the sort of marketability of the cast. Even though this is sort of like a sort of darker and like challenging story at times, like because of how like not non-focused, but because of how almost episodic it is, which is something that you definitely don't see in a lot of movies nowadays. Like structurally, it was distinct, which I liked a lot. I definitely have always leaned towards that sort of structure, building to like a thematic point, which is usually culminated through an ending. I like that structure a lot, but it's definitely not what people have grown to expect um, in modern days. So, yeah, you can talk about the plot a bit because I don't really have much to say about it.
Uh,
Yeah, so you can go
well,
ahead.
like we mentioned earlier, it's a lot of different characters who don't necessarily meet on screen, but they're like connect. Like for example, like the sheriff of the town, his sister is involved with. Well, I think we should put a spoiler thing up
Yeah,
now,
we
just in
already
case.
spoiled There Will Be Blood,
Okay, okay.
so
The sister of the sheriff is involved with the serial killer, and they meet Arvin, who is played by Tom Holland, like later in the movie, and like they're all like connected, like through very distant like threads, I guess, but so not all of them meet on screen, but the main core of the story is basically Arvin's life. And so in the beginning they show his father, who's played by Bill Skarsgård, in World War II, I believe, and he sort of like it shows how he met Arvin's mother, and they had the Arvin, and the mother sort of like gets sick and passes, and the father turns into like a religious fanatic and believes that like like sort of like anything I sacrifice will save my wife, but obviously it doesn't work, and he later kills himself, and which leaves Arvin alone. And so again, like I said earlier, he gets picked up by his grandparents, and then the film goes to him as like late teen, early 20s, um like guy, and it's sort of like that time period is the majority of the film. And so his storyline specifically focuses on him and his sister, and there's a new preacher in town, who's played by Robert Pattinson, and and it's sort of like how he's like negatively affecting the sister. And a separate storyline is this serial killer who him and his wife are like a murdering team. And then another storyline is it's like a traveling preacher who's played by Harry Melling, and him and his wife, and it tells their story. So it's those three main groups of people, and their stories intertwine and like converge at various points in the film. Um,
yeah,
yeah, that was really confusing, but it's really hard to explain.
it's yeah, I just thought of this while you were talking. It's kind of like if There Will Be Blood was Magnolia style like anthology of like this sort of through line of like There Will Be Blood thematic and visual aspects of sort of like intertwining with the Magnolia semi Magnolia style anthology. Like there's still like I never felt like confused as to like where why like it's not a
Yeah.
huge jump between the storylines. Like they all feel connected enough not to be like I wouldn't call this an anthology or anything. I think episodic is closer to
It's
the,
more, it's like Pulp Fiction kind of, like in a way,
yeah,
the way that
but
they
well,
organize that.
yeah, even I still think it's more structured than like Pulp Fiction. Well, obviously Pulp Fiction you have the non-linear aspect, but um I think for sure this is like sort of like a series of like thematically like potent vignettes almost. Not vignettes, no, that's
Not
not
a
the right
vignette,
term.
no. It's more like the days are going by and each person has a different thing they have to do that day and it sort of flows like that. I think is
Yeah.
probably like the most accurate way to describe it.
And always reiterating sort of the same thing, like by
Yeah.
showing it over and over, sort of like this inexplicable evil in a sort of like innocent world, I want to say,
It
is sort of
yeah,
like,
it's like each storyline has their own like, not to sound like cheesy or anything, but each has their own devil essentially, which goes back to the title because it's like that negative like evil influence is in every aspect of these people's lives, no matter how innocent they are.
yeah.
But yeah.
um I think, well, talking about sort of the technical aspects as well, it the direction was strong. The Who's the director again? Antonio
Antonio
Campos.
Campos.
I haven't seen Christine, which is a 2016 film he did, but I had heard about it a lot. Um, Starring Rebecca Hall, um, as you might know from The Prestige. But
Yes.
no, I haven't seen that, but I know a lot of people liked it. But anyway, I thought his direction was very sort of present, but it wasn't like, well, obviously not comparable to There Will Be Blood. Or yeah. Um, but it always felt competent, like I never found myself sort of like bored by the visuals. Like it definitely was always building to a purpose. Like it always felt like, even though I didn't like some parts of the runtime, I felt like some of it could have been trimmed, especially early on when you kind of don't fully understand what they're going for, which I guess because I've only seen this once on repeat viewings would probably be, improved. um it all felt with purpose by the end of it. It's like, oh, I get what they're doing.
Also, just to add on to that, he like what you said about watching it like the world around him is full of corruption. He was like not really an outsider, but he was definitely a loner in all aspects of his life. Really the only like people he talked to were his sister, Lenora, and then his grandparents. But he was like against, not against the church, but he it was clear that he didn't enjoy being in the church, and like it was clear he didn't have any friends. He made like not enemies, but like he would beat up the people who like bothered his sister, and so he was very much like, so like sort of like a closed loner who sort of viewed everything that was going on in the town as like you said, like not good, but he definitely was like a like one of those like lone, like the makings of sort of a violent vigilante types, like as he later sort of goes on to inhibit that, and not inhibit inhabit that role.
Yeah, well, but not in the sort of glorified way that like a
No,
superhero
yeah.
movie would.
More
um
of like he's just like,
a product of his surroundings, I think,
yeah.
is the best way to sort of
Yeah.
say. It's like it's a very, I mean, dark, messed up film in a lot of ways. Like
Yeah, it
it's
really is.
but it's just like, I mean, it's all like driving it, like the world is like that. He is like, he lives in a evil place, an evil world, and that sort of, you said he like wasn't really connecting with the church aspects, but that was because a lot of what they were saying he like saw very direct contrasts with his entire life. And so I
Yeah.
think that, like,
Especially his childhood.
yeah, he really like, it's not really like in objection to religion or stuff like that. Just like There Will Be Blood isn't like, there is no God, God is dead, the world is evil, stuff like that. It's like in contrast to the power dynamics of it, the sort of real world application, like down to earth, like this is the guy, this is what he sees in his world, this is why he sees it, this is why he thinks the way he thinks, this is why he's doing what he's doing, this is what it is. And it's that sort of like, it's not really commentating, it's not really telling like this sort of like super thrilling story. It's demonstrating a very specific thing. It's portraying a very specific type of message. And I think that's sort of where a lot of people kind of get turned off by this, where it's like it's not really about the plot, it's not really about the characters, and it's not really about like some deep like art house type thing. It's about saying, it's like it's about demonstrating something. And through that, plus the sort of non-traditional structure of like having sort of episodic type things, of multiple sort of intertwining storylines, it sort of all combines into something that just barely kind of sticks together through the ending. And so I think it's all really well done, a lot of it. It's not really groundbreaking, it's not a masterpiece, but I think for like a 2020 Netflix release, it's refreshing to see, like, because this does feel like a filmmaker's vision. This feels like it has a real writer and a real director, and it has real, like people behind it that actually care about what this is trying to do and say. So I feel like it's not a masterpiece, but it's important to sort of critically support in what it stands for, essentially. Which that's kind of relating back to what I was saying about like There Will Be Blood and sort of that era, the changing times, etc. But for a Netflix original, I think this is absolutely great. you know?
Yeah, like what we were saying before, this is when I watch like the reason I watched this movie is because my dad was like, dude, this is such a messed up movie, you gotta watch it. And I put it on and I loved it because it felt like such a turn from like most of the movies that have been coming out. Like obviously, some really awesome movies. Some of my favorite movies came out in the last 5 years, but like it was so much reverting back to like I felt like this movie really encompassed like not early 2000s, but like just before the 2010s. You know what I mean? Like that sort of vibe. And like you said, it had like it had like I feel like it had more heart behind it than you would expect from like most movies coming out. Nowadays, but especially specifically about this like topic and genre and stuff like this because it was a drama. It's not like really a crime movie. It's a pretty basic drama with some violent aspects, but I honestly thought that it was really well written. And I mean like the whole the sister storyline and like sort of like Arvin's relationship with the preacher, Robert Pattinson's preacher, that is, was honestly really heartbreaking. Like I mean like the fact that like the preacher was sort of like, I don't know if he was like directly molesting the sister, but like he was definitely like preying on her um enough so to make her like commit suicide. And I remember I was like so distraught during that scene, especially when like she tried to stop it right before she like slipped, and like then she ends up dying, which sets Arvin off on this like murderous spree because like the last person really he loved besides his grandparents was dead. And he kind of like goes off the rails at this point, and it was just such like heartbreakingly like it was just so heartbreaking to watch that unfold. And it's sort of like from that point on he sort of just like snapped, you know what I mean, and went after everybody. And that sort of created the atmosphere of he sort of any person that gets in his way, not in like sort of like a way that he's bad now. It's just like he like goes after the preacher guy, and now anybody else who's trying to put him in jail for that is in danger. You know what I mean? Like he sort of is trying to escape the thing he had to do, but he's like stuck because there's people chasing after him. You know what I mean? And so like that sequence for me was sort of like A, heartbreaking, and B, sort of like set the tone for the rest of the film, and also what the film in and of itself meant. You know what I mean? And as sad as it was, I really did like that that storyline because it was just so impactful.
Yeah, I mean, it's, characters with depth making choices that actually have consequence. I think what you were saying with like it feels sort of like a callback or like a sort of mid to late 2000s film in just sort of that like it's not a studio product. I think it's literally just because I mean I watched a lot of sort of smaller films. Like I literally tried to watch every single 2020 release that I could, and so I wouldn't say like it really felt distinct in that sense for me, but like I mean I watched a lot of movies last year. Um but it really all felt like it was sort of a like well deserved it deserved the attention that it got. I wouldn't say that I really loved the film. Like I said, it was in my top 25 of the year, but not even in my top 20 or whatever. But um, I still think that this was probably like, especially from like a filmmaker who hasn't really like sort of wasn't really like that pre-established. Like who hadn't really done that. This was probably, I'm assuming, I haven't seen much of his other stuff, but like probably one of his sort of bigger films that he's done. And so just sort of seeing that, like, because I mean, obviously, there's going to be a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie. There's going to be a new Quentin Tarantino. There's going to be new, from all of the pre-established stuff. But it's always good to see like new people making like films that feel like films and not just like studio regulated products, which I mean can be good. And I'm not, again, like I'm saying, just because it's different doesn't mean that it's bad. But this definitely feels sort of like a kind of blend that I hope we can sort of see more of, like, something shot on film, something that's kind of dark. Like, I mean, this really is like not something you could really show to like general audiences. And like, I mean, it's something that's challenging at times, like but it's, real, like has depth. It feels like a legitimate like film experience, which is something that can't be said for a lot of other stuff like this with sort of super popular casts and stuff. So yeah, it was definitely something that's more like not what you would expect, especially in that sort of structure. I keep bringing that up, but that's because I feel like um that's probably why it's as effective as it is for me, is how the story is presented and told and sort of what it eventually amounts to, because it's definitely something that kind of grows on you thematically, like for over time, like after the film ends, you kind of like think like it's something that makes you think. It's something that sticks with you even after it ends, which is something that I wasn't really expecting from this. Even after I watched it, I was like, yeah, that was pretty good, that's fine. But then like over time it kind of like really sort of, every time I thought back on it, like it really sort of deepens your appreciation every time like you sort of think about what it does and what it's able to do in a way that is distinct, really, for a 2020 release. Like it was very interesting.
Yeah, and to go back to the story and the structure thing that you were talking about, I thought that because this was originally a book, um but Antonio Campos is listed as a writer along with Donald Ray Pollock and Paulo Campos, which I'm assuming is a relative. But I thought that Arvin's decline, like his character arc, like in the downward spiral that it went, was very well done because like despite his sort of um what's the word, pessimistic, I guess, or skeptical, that's the word I was looking for, despite Arvin's skeptical lens of his town and like the people in it, he is like a good kid. Like that was like the he's like this bigger, not bigger, his is like the older brother who protects his sister. You know, he sort of like stands up for his grandma. He had like a tragic past, but he's like a kind person. You know, and he sort of just like keeps walking into these bad situations where like it has to end in bloodshed because there's no other, like, you know what I mean? Like it's sort of like his decline because he's been trying to like stay like a good kid. He doesn't want to do this, but like I mean, with the preacher specifically, he had to because his sister was dead and he was grieving and he needed revenge. But like when he kills the a bunch of the side characters and ultimately when he kills Sebastian Stan's character, the sheriff at the end, like it was all just like a sequence of bad events that he couldn't really control. And like it ending with him sort of like getting away and like yawning with his like life flashing before him. It's sort of like it was just like such a downward spiral, but it was I thought it was very naturally written, as like sort of like instead of he loses his mind because of one event, it was a set of like catalysts that sort of unhinged him, um, you know, and like progressively just got harder and harder to sort of manage as the film was winding down. And I just thought it was really well done, and I think you know from like going from like this sort of like sad, like lonely kid to like this murderer who didn't want this to happen at the end was like a very natural, but like even slightly like unexpected turn because you wouldn't expect like I mean like he's like such like a quiet kid in the film and he doesn't really like talk much unless it's necessary. And it just was such like a natural descent for me and I really thought that that was really well done.
Yeah, I feel like I'm praising it a bit too much. Like
I think
it's
that you're overly critical.
well, I
This is a good movie.
well, it's a good movie, but it's not a great movie. I think there are lots of things to point out um about its issues, and I think for the film itself, it's good for the most part. But I think there are some issues. I mean, I've been talking a lot about the structure just because I like how it's sort of different than what, the traditional thing. But I think there are issues of it with sort of how dark it is and how, like, even though I like that part of it as a whole, when you're actually watching it as a film, it becomes kind of overwhelming at points and kind of not balanced out. It's kind of like miserable to watch for a lot of the time. I think it's worth seeing, definitely, but it's very much like a kind of a mess at parts. It gets messy. I wouldn't call it a mess as a whole, but it gets messy in terms of the plot and the events, and it kind of gets sort of muddled down while you're actually watching it. I think that we're talking about it with, months, even probably a year going past since we saw it. Sort of looking at it definitely like as a whole rather than like as sort of a film experience. And so I think thematically and stuff, I appreciate a lot of what it did. But as an actual film and watching it, like I have no plans to ever watch this again, really. And I definitely don't think that it's like I just wanted to clarify about the structure. I think the structure has a lot of issues in itself, but I was praising it in that it was different. It was a departure from what you would expect for this. And so it's important to keep a nuanced, critical discussion of films, regardless if I view them as positive or negative as a whole, because a lot of what film is a form of entertainment. It is a form of media. And so, looking at it from a purely analytical aspect, I think I should not do. So that's why I was clarifying.
What you're saying about some of the darker aspects of it and like how it sort of was like miserable to watch at times because I think that A that was the point.
Yeah,
Um and B I actually I mean, I don't know, like I like as weird as it is to say I like dark movies just cuz it's like interesting, I guess. I don't know. But no, I thought that like I thought it was good because it was like this like you could feasibly see everything that happened in that movie happen in real life. You know, like there's nothing like that in that movie that really is like, okay, that's just completely unrealistic. Like all of that
Well,
potentially could happen. Well, think
you can
about it.
say
Like
that,
what
yeah, but you could say that for There Will Be Blood as well.
well,
You
yeah,
could say
I
that for
know.
most. You can say that for
I
most movies.
I know, but I'm saying what my point was is that like with that sort of like subject and like those events that occurred, you're not it's not gonna be like, oh, there's a rainbow over there. You know what I mean? Like it's not gonna be all like there's really no like happy moments in the film, if I recall. Like if there is, it's like very quick.
Well, there's
Um
moments of like peaceful downtime as
no, I
opposed
know,
to like
but
the.
I mean specifically like happy. I know there's peaceful moments, especially the ending, it's peaceful, but like there's no like outwardly like happy moments that I can think of, except for like maybe like a couple of small like jokes or like whatever. But or maybe the birthday scene, but that's like it. Um, and I think that that is not telling, but indicative of the subject matter of the film. And I thought that that was probably like a good choice to go that direction. So, you know, I get why it maybe wasn't enjoyable, but I thought that it made it more a more cohesive experience to sort of like you're put into how they're feeling. You know what I mean? Like nobody's happy in this town. Like maybe they look like they are, but nobody's really happy. I mean, like, you know, like all this stuff is just sort of like a facade that they put up to like keep the pretense of like this like small homely like you know neighborly town you know but so yeah, I didn't necessarily mind the sort of dark and dingy miserable parts of it because I thought it made the experience more cohesive in my opinion.
Well, no, I mean I understood the thematic aspects of why it was darker. That's what I was praising earlier. I was just saying that as you're watching it, it doesn't, since it's like, mildly lengthy film. It some of it feels like it doesn't justify its thematic purpose, like its own existence. Some of it doesn't feels like it's over the top trying to explain something that's already been thoroughly explored. It feels almost gratuitous at times. So it's like not hard to sit through in terms of like, oh, it's so dark I can't deal with it, but just like it's just doesn't fit. Like it's just miserable for the sake of being miserable at times. Um, that was just a criticism of the film as a whole. Um, but no, I don't think that we're in any disagreement about it. I'm just clarifying that it's not a perfect movie. It's not a
Well,
great
yeah,
movie.
I don't think there's any perfect movie.
Well, there definitely is. A movie can be perfect. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. Like I said at the very beginning of this, I appreciate it more so than I enjoyed it. I appreciate it what it tried to do more so than what it actually does do.
That's
Because
fair,
in
yeah.
a lot of ways it does come short on some of the stuff. Like I think again, because we both sort of watch this with a good distance behind the actual viewing of the film, we're kind of like boiling down the thematic aspects rather than the experience of actually sitting down and watching it. So I feel like I would probably be a bit more critical if I just watched this, but like I said, it kind of grew on me over time. I think it's still well made, refreshing, and interesting. You know, like I said, I think the main thing of the writing and having well developed, interesting characters that have depth and conflict and who make like choices that actually have like deep consequences, not just on the plot, but also on the characters themselves. And choices which are, not good. Like it characters who are not morally just like concrete and to make choices that are, oh, like that's a bad thing, but I understand why that character did that because I've spent 2 hours with them. I understand what exactly is going on, and I understand how awful the world is. So I think overall, good movie, good performances, great thematic stuff, okay aspects to it, but as a whole, it's just fine. Do you have any concluding thoughts on it as well? Because we're at hour
Uh,
45.
no, just to wrap up, yeah, I mean, like, it's not a perfect thing because, I stick by there really are no perfect movies. There's always something wrong with something.
Well,
But let me finish. Let me finish. I genuinely did enjoy it. I thought it was something new, and while I'm not in a hurry to rewatch it, I still think that it was well done. It had like the whole thing was engaging. The performances are pretty good. Uh, yes, it did have some, like you said, it had some issues with like it had some plot issues and
I
pacing
think
issues, but
pacing, yeah, that was the word I
yeah.
should have said earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, but I regardless, I mean like I gave this a 3.5 out of 5. I think you gave it a 3 out of 5, right? So we have pretty similar.
No, I gave it a 3.5, actually. I know it
Oh,
sounded
did
like
you?
yeah, I've been critical of it, but yeah, we have the exact same rating. I probably, on a filmmaking level, like I'm just clarifying the reasons why I feel the need to heavily criticize something, even though I really liked it.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
just kind of mm, that's just how I am as someone who watches film. I can give a rating based on just like an enjoyment factor, even though objectively I know there's lots wrong with it. So that's why I feel the need to, clarify a lot of the sort of aspects of the film that, um, I don't know.
No,
I'm,
yeah, I get you. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, yeah, we both gave it the same rating, which is kind of funny because we were kind of going back and forth anyway. But,
Yeah.
um, yeah, top 25 of 2020. I mean, I've watched more 2020 films than any other year in film
That's saying
history.
something.
Well, but that was because I actively
No, I know,
attempted
yeah.
to. Um, so I mean, the fact it's in the top 25, even though that sounds like sort of lower, it's I thought it was a really great thing in terms of 2020. I think it came out at the right time as well. I don't think this would have done as good in theaters. So no, regardless of the Netflix stuff, it felt like a good direction for them to go in anyway. Like making more not that that was sort of independent, but um more like let or rather less safe movies. Like taking more risks as a company and sort of giving voices to things like this that feel like they were, made by a filmmaker and just sort of given an opportunity to put this out there through a company like Netflix. And so I feel like, um, even though there's a big conversation to be had about streaming services and their role in sort of modern days of film, I think for sure in that like specific capacity, I can't see anyone really arguing that as a negative because this film would have probably done awful in theaters and like it probably would have lost a lot of money. Even though, well, the marketing probably would have been way different. There would have been a huge emphasis on the cast and everything. But regardless, the point is, um, it's interesting to compare this to There Will Be Blood, with There Will Be Blood sort of being like the ultimate sort of cinematic, like theatrical experience. And so I feel like it's interesting. It's an interesting time that we live in for cinema just as a whole. But yeah, wrapping up thoughts because we've already been going for a while. Good movie. That's it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, bye.